Good evening. This is the
upgraded.
regular meeting of the Evanston Plan Commission. We have a quorum.
And we have a one-up.
Is there a motion regarding the minutes of our last meeting, which was July 17th?
We don't remember July 17 anymore.
Do you have hard copy? My machine's crashed.
Anybody else need one?
Thank you.
Well, actually, I read it online.
I did too, but
It was pretty abbreviated.
All of the papers that are on the desks in front of us are from another committee.
Speak, yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't here at the meeting, so I cannot say whether or not to approve.
Is there a motion from someone who was present at the meeting?
Motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting?
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion or corrections? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. That brings us to the zoning text amendment, 13 PLND 0087. We should start with the staff report.
Good evening, Commissioners. Melissa Klatz, zoning planner. So the proposal before us tonight is based on an aldermanic reference to allow parking lots in the B3 zoning district as a special use. There's only one B3 zoning district within the city of Evanston, and it is located on Howard Street. The idea behind the text amendment is that currently there is not an ample parking available on Howard Street, and there is strong redevelopment efforts by the city to redevelop that area. With some of the businesses that have recently opened and more that are planning to open in the future, parking will become even more of an issue. So with this proposed text amendment, there would be the opportunity for both private developers or the municipality to apply for a special use permit for parking lots in the area. Now, the reason for the special use is so that we can ensure that there won't be too many parking lots in the area and there wouldn't be any kind of negative cumulative effect. There is definitely a need for more parking, but we don't want every lot in the area to become parking. In addition to the request as a special use, we need to look at the required setbacks. Currently, the setbacks in the B3 district require that no parking is allowed between the front facade or street side yard facade of a building and the property line. But since parking lots wouldn't have a building on the property, we need to adjust for that. So the staff recommendation, as well as the zoning committee of the Plan Commission, is to require a landscaped setback as determined by the Spark Committee, and that is a regulation that is in place for parking lots and other types of uses in other districts throughout the city as well.
Is there a discussion?
Melissa, has anyone come forward with a request to take down their building and build a parking lot?
So this came from the alderperson?
It did. It was a request made by Alderman Rainey.
You know, my comments in the zoning committee meeting for this, remain the same. That I'd prefer if we have parking lots that they be planned by the city and they be public parking lots, not private parking lots. Now, one of the things we did talk about was there was a per fee, because I asked about the tax base. What happens to taxes if we tear down a building and put up a parking lot? I believe, I'm not sure who it was on the committee, said that there was a per space tax. Trisha, was that you? There's a fee or per space fee that was not confirmed there.
For municipal parking lots, of which there are 2 in the area surrounding the B3 district, some spots can be metered, and then others are available for a monthly fee and used as permit parking.
The issue was if it's a private lot, that there is a per space fee.
I'm not exactly sure of how it would work, but it would all relate to the property value and how it's taxed.
Okay, because that's one of the issues we did have at the zoning, and we wanted I believe we wanted confirmation. So I would like to know that before I would be voting in favor of this from a private entity tearing a building down and putting up a lot, because if that's going to impact our tax base significantly, I'd like to know that. And then just from a public policy perspective, it seems that, the city has put up lots around the city to encourage people to park and to help business districts and to have a zoning change in hopes that somebody will tear down a building and put up a parking lot doesn't necessarily seem to me to be necessarily encouraging that unless there's somebody already asking for that. And if it's a need of the city, I mean, we're buying buildings and we're rehabbing buildings. If we need a parking lot there, then perhaps that's something the city should be doing.
You might be looking at just one side of that equation, though. I mean, the argument was if we had more parking, then the businesses that are now starting to come into Howard Street will attract more customers, clientele, whatever you call that. And that's what we're trying to do here.
And I agree with that.
Okay.
I'm just not sure by putting in a changing zoning to enable somebody to tear down a building to put up a parking lot, it's going to do that. So that if the city really wants to have parking to encourage people to come to the neighborhood to go to the businesses there, then we should be building a parking lot. I think that's a function of a city. We build roads. That's governments do.
There is a parking tax. There is a parking tax. I'm looking at section 3215.2, tax imposed, and it looks to me like it's $144 per year per space, providing it's occupied, and then there's lower rates for partial occupancy for shorter periods.
So
60 cents for each motor vehicle in or on each parking lot area per 24-hour period.
So if you had 30, if you said 60 cents per 24-hour period, so it's not a lot of tax.
Or $144 per year. $36 per quarter.
Well,
There's many ways.
Are there any businesses that have parking spaces behind? I'm trying to picture Howard Street on our side. There must be some of those buildings that have parking spaces behind the buildings. Is anything that can be worked out where we can utilize some of that space in the evening?
There are a few. Typically, the properties that have some parking available, it's fully utilized, mostly by their employees since it's accessible off of the alley. But there really isn't ample available parking on the Evanston side that could be considered shared parking for multiple properties.
I should mention the parking tax is for paid parking where there's a charge to the entity parking.
Is there a particular, and I apologize for not knowing, is there a particular site? It's just basically along Howard?
Not that I'm aware of. The aldermanic reference was for the entire B3 district in general. Also to note that does follow the Howard Ridge TIF area, and so it's keeping with the intent of that.
So it would be between the north side of Howard, between Chicago
Between the CTA tracks and Ridge.
and Ridge. So my comment to about the hesitation to change the zoning, if the city were to convert one of those properties into a parking lot, it would have to take the property, right? That's the only way it could do it.
Unless they own it now.
Unless entering into a redevelopment agreement with a private
Right.
developer.
That whole area is pretty dense, pretty built up. If the highest and best use was a surface parking lot for any one of those owners, I got to imagine that they would do that. It's probably not financially feasible for the city to spend money to acquire the property because it's going to be pretty expensive. It would seem that if there's to allow this zoning would give a property owner who has an interim use, maybe, or has a particular building that they would want to raise to have a surface parking lot in the interim. One, the tax burden would still be on the property owner, which would generate revenues for the city. Secondly, the owner would be charging to park there. They'd have to pay, I believe, a tax on that revenue. Whereas if the city owned it, it comes off of the tax roll and it becomes a whole other issue. So I mean, to kind of have this provisional zoning seems to be, it kind of satisfies the best of both worlds for the city. I can tell you that from my own experience, which is, I would say, an area that's less dense than Howard, and that is, if anybody's familiar with the segment along Toohey in Lincolnwood, between Crawford and going east, there is a Japanese restaurant, Rengate. There's a Cleaners, and there's a couple other storefronts. And then there's a parking lot in the middle. And then going east, there is a Baskin Robbins, a Dunkin' Donuts, and a Holy Frijoles. I can tell you that because I had personal experience with that particular property, it was extremely expensive for Lincolnwood to acquire that site and turn it into a surface parking lot. And they don't charge anything for that surface parking lot. And that surface parking lot's pretty much always full. Every time I've gone there to either eat or to do something, it's always been full. That was a very expensive acquisition, and that area is, businesses, it's somewhat dense, but it's certainly not as dense as our Howard Street. So, I mean, it would seem to me that having this zoning change to allow this type of use, it's really only going to get utilized probably for an interim basis at best, sounds to me.
I see the economics also differently than Mr. Freeman. As the property value and rents go up, it will not be feasible for a private owner to use it as a parking lot. With the initial development and the rents and values still being low, it's probably not feasible to build enclosed parking. So I see this as a stopgap measure which would work in the market until the values went up there, and then we would not see it anymore.
And then the lot would be gone, and then businesses would be impacted because there's no parking. And my issue is less the tax. The whole issue is if it's public policy to create parking spaces to encourage business in that neighborhood, then we should be building a lot. That's my point.
But when
the secondary point,
when the value of the businesses at that location goes up, then they can afford to provide parking, which they can't do now.
Valet.
And as an auxiliary use in connection with the business, they don't need the rezoning. But the difficulty is now when the value is low and they can't afford to acquire the additional land for parking.
so with the business, when they don't need rezoning, so they tear the building down next door, they buy the building, they tear it down next door of their business to put up a parking lot? And then that doesn't require rezoning?
You would find that all over Evanston. They provide land, and on the land they put parking to serve the business, if it's economically worth doing.
Was there a restriction that this parking lot be solely a surface parking lot? I don't remember seeing that in any of the
There was no
wording.
restriction.
The difficulty is that it's not tied to a business. If it was tied to a business,
Yeah.
then you could do that. You could have surface parking. We have it all over the city, but you can't have it by itself. Normally, I would worry about what happened in the West Loop area downtown with block after block of property being held as parking. But with the special use cumulative impact requirements, I just don't think it's going to happen here.
I see down the line that we'll have enough relationships with our counterpart on Howard Street where the L is, where they have that huge parking lot, that could become available. And also the property on Chicago Avenue north of Howard, where that, I don't even know what kind of business is in there, but it used to be kind of a garage. They used to rent cars there, rent a wreck, but there is some vacant land around there, or land that could very easily become vacant and become a parking lot. Then they could valet up and back. I don't see any downside risk, is what I'm saying to this. I don't think you can go wrong. My 2 cents. Seth.
Can I ask a question? Presumably the city also needs the zoning ordinance if Alderman Rainey already has in her mind that she would ask for a building to be bought and torn down.
It would not be absolutely necessary. We can always do a municipal exemption, but it's always preferred that the city follow the same regulations that everyone else has to follow.
So this could be just doing the stitch and the thread is coming soon, the request.
It could.
What was that? I'm sorry?
What I would expect is that Alderman Rainey's next move would be to ask the city to buy a building to do the public parking lot.
I don't know what she
I
will
don't see
do.
any downside, and I already, in the
All right, you guys convinced me. But I still think from a public policy perspective, if you are trying to encourage business and you think a parking lot is necessary, then you should be building one and not rely on market forces to build it unless there's somebody there sitting there waiting for this ordinance to tear one down to build one. And nobody's come forward to say that there is.
we should allow it. We should allow the opportunity for that to happen. You know, from a public policy perspective, I'd like a city that is not bankrupt.
I would agree with that.
Any other comments or discussion? Do you want to address the standards? Do you want to do something different than address the standards?
Standards.
Okay. This is a text amendment. So the first standard is whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive general plan. I would look to the policies relating to economic development, and I think it is consistent with those. Other comments on that standard? The second is whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of the existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. We don't have subject property with this text amendment. The third standard is whether the proposed amendment would have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties. I believe that standard is, since this is authorizing a special use, is addressed in the special use standards and procedures. Finally, the adequacy of public facilities and services.
This is addressing that.
That too is addressed in the special use standards, and I trust our city council and zoning board to vigorously apply the special use standards that would cover that when there might be a specific site for which this would be applicable. Any other comments? Is there any other discussion? All those in favor of recommending this draft text amendment to the City Council?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. That brings us to committee reports. Are there any committee reports at this time?
Just yours.
I have no committee report at this time, but I will next time.
Okay.
I did last time, but it's too late now. Is there a motion to adjourn, or is there any other business?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded. Seconded.
No one coming forward with other business? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. That took us 27 minutes.